Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was a sunny April. Spring is always associated with the beginning of new life. All people were looking forward to it this year because March was cold and the awakening of nature was delayed. But the news of this month amazed everyone. Everywhere in the newspapers, on TV and radio, they were talking about only one thing. Everyone from old grandmothers at the doorstep to pigeons flying over Washington was talking about this news. The Capitol was stunned by this event, and everything revolved around a famous businessman who decided to get married. But it would not have struck anyone if not for one strange circumstance. He had many marriages with stars, but this time it was different. The girl was a complete stranger to no one. No one knew her name or even her appearance. All the newspapers had a question mark drawn instead of her face. The media kept him on his toes. They kept watch over him day and night in the hope that when he came out, he would at least clear the air. Martin Newman was one of the most famous businessmen in the world. His company developed games, made a sensation years ago, and was still the main one on the market. He was loved by everyone from 15-year-old teenagers to men in their 40s. Of course, there were also girls among the audience, but still the majority of the audience were men who liked to play war games at the computer. Martin was known for his personal life to almost everyone. He'd been married to 3 celebrities from abroad, but now he'd surprised everyone. To marry someone unknown to any living soul seemed strange and irrational. No one knew who this mysterious girl was, who was so zealously hidden in his mansion. But where there is intrigue and mystery, there's interest. Society needs these mysteries. That's why this wedding was eagerly awaited by everyone. One journalist managed to get as close as possible to his house by passing the 3 guards at the gate. The house was, of course, outside the city. The businessman tried to solve almost all cases remotely, but it was a very dodgy reporter who, unfortunately, also failed. When Martin was leaving his house to get into his car, the reporter jumped out of the bushes and ran at him with all his legs. But he was immediately stopped by the guards. One of the thugs wanted to threaten the poor guy with a gun. He started to pull it out of his pocket, but Martin stopped him. "Let him through." "I will quickly answer," in a stern tone, the businessman told his guard. He obeyed and stepped back. The journalist immediately realized what he was doing and quickly pulled out a camera and a microphone. "Can you tell me the name of your fiancée? Just the name, please." Martin hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to understand whether to answer or not. But he decided to answer. "Her name is Agatha," he said, barely grinned enigmatically, and got into a car with tinted windows. The very next day, it was all over the news channels and newspapers. The world knew the name. And again, the discussion of the wedding, which was scheduled for May 15, began. Everyone was waiting for this event. Wanted to at least somehow get information about where the wedding of a famous businessman will be held. What guests are invited? Where will they go on their honeymoon? But Martin and his agents were silent. All questions of journalists remained unanswered. Only sometimes on the face of the businessman could be seen a slight smirk when he was asked about the bride. This only fueled the interest of the public. At the presentation of the new project, Martin, unfortunately, flooded with questions not about the purpose of his activities, but about marriage. He was beginning to tire of it. In the midst of the siege, which was arranged by journalists, the businessman made a sign to everyone with his hand to wait a minute and leaned over to his manager. Quietly asked him something. How could the reporters not strain their ears? They couldn't hear anything. The question was, what if she wakes up? Martin asked the manager he trusted like his mother. "Those are strong drugs." "Nothing will happen," he replied and winked at the chief. Finally, the cherished day arrived. The wedding was decided to be held in the very center. People crowded around the fence instead, trying to get a glimpse of the bride and groom. And then, accompanied by 3 escort cars, a Maybach with tinted windows drove up to Max. People were almost throwing themselves at the car, trying to see who was sitting there. But they failed miserably. They were dragged away by law enforcement. There was a commotion and a crush. After a few minutes, a Polak Martin got out of the car. He did not even look back and immediately went to the door of the registry office. But he was stopped by a photographer who pointed to the bride. He wanted to take a picture of them at the registry office. Happy and full of hope for a bright future. "You will only take pictures of what I say," rudely replied Martin. He pushed the guy away and entered the building, and the audience watched the bride's exit. But even here, they had no luck. The driver opened the door and helped the girl in the white dress stand up. As soon as the light fell on her face, everyone screamed with delight. Immediately, the discussion began. "Oh my God, she's so young. She must be marrying him for his money." They were talking in the crowd. "It's obvious she's a kept woman." Others responded. Amid all the shouting and yelling, the bride walked towards the building. She was accompanied by a guard with black glasses. She held onto his arm as if she feared she would fall. They walked very slowly. Someone in the crowd immediately said that she was handicapped, and everyone picked up on that. There were 1,000 cameras pointed at the poor girl. Everyone wanted to capture her face and her gait. The media was at the forefront of capturing every little detail to create new gossip. The public had to be fed new content, bread and spectacle. The motto of ancient Rome is always relevant, and the tabloids are doing a great job of it. Finally, the bride entered the registry office and the shouts of the crowd were left behind. Before her opened a stunning view of the high ceilings, framed, gilded stucco. At the top, a painting depicting angels could be seen. Everything suggests it's a place of peace. But the bride didn't feel that way. She felt rather strange in general. This was noticed by the guests as well. They also managed to notice her incredible beauty. The girl was very slender and young. In appearance, she was not more than 25. Among the guests on the groom's side were his colleagues or some influential people in business. On the bride's side, there were only 2 bridesmaids who were sitting on chairs and chatting. Everyone was waiting for the ceremony to begin. This bride was acting very strangely, not talking to anyone. She's standing in the corner looking down at the floor. "After all, it's her wedding," said one of the guests of the celebration. It was a woman named Lily, who also had a similar company. Only they developed games not for computers, but for mobile devices. And they have the right audience. Mostly people over 50 and don't talk. Rumor has it that this is the model he brought back from Australia. She doesn't know the language. Maybe that's why she doesn't talk to anyone and acts so quiet, her neighbor replied. "Really?" Another woman joined the conversation. "I'm sure it's his niece, maybe even his cousin. He's had feelings for her for a long time. But with his parents alive, of course, he couldn't marry her. It would be a disgrace. And now that his parents are dead, he can finally do it. How awful." Lily marveled. "And where did you get this information?" "I have my own connections," answered about the woman Morris. She just explained to them the origin of this girl, and they do not believe her. What kind of outrage is this? What if the groom himself approached them? "Oh, dear Martin, it's so good to see you at last," Lily exclaimed, shaking his hand. "Good afternoon. It's very nice to see you all here as my guests. I hope everything is satisfactory. Of course. We were just discussing you. We're so happy for you. But Martin, tell me, why the secrecy?" One of the women laughed. "Will you never reveal your girlfriend's identity to us?" "I'm madly in love with her," the businessman exclaimed sharply. It was as if he had rehearsed this phrase for a long time. That's why it sounded a bit fake. So as soon as I met her, I decided to make her my wife. "I hope the bride doesn't mind," the other woman joked. Martin looked at her strangely and without replying, walked away with his head held high. As if the phrase he had just said offended him very much. They were a strange couple, Lily summed up. Rumors were going from extreme to extreme. But the fact was the fact. The girl was unknown to anyone. She had come from nowhere. No one had ever seen her around Martin. No one knew how long they had been dating. Absolutely nothing was known. That's why the news of the wedding made the whole community so excited. It was a real sensation. It was Agatha who was too mysterious. She hadn't uttered a word since she got out of the car. No one knew what her voice was like. Was it melodious or rough? And how old was she? She looked very young. And she was marrying a man who turned 55 this year. All of this didn't connect in my head. While everyone was whispering and talking, waiting for the ceremony to begin, Agatha was led out of the hall to the right into the corridor. There they dragged her into a room, sat her in front of a mirror, and began to put her makeup in order. She was working right in the car. So correct me, that's all. In 15 minutes, the ceremony will begin, said Agent Martin, and left the room, leaving the girls alone. Agatha was not feeling well. She saw everything through a veil, as if she were in a dream. She stared at the mirror for a long time, trying to remember something. It was as if those facial features were alien to her. Her own face was not like her real one. She was like she was in a trance. The makeup artist did her amazing makeup and then put on a veil to cover her face. Like, "Baby, you're ready," smiled the makeup artist. "I hope you really love him." Badoma, and Agatha was pushed towards the door. She completely lost her bearings and didn't know where to go. But she knew the guard was guarding her at the door. He led the girl back to the hall where the ceremony was to be held. Agatha was literally pushed onto the white carpet, studded with rose petals. She almost collapsed on the floor. What amazed the guests. But the girl immediately recovered and, under the melodious music, went down the aisle with flowers. All eyes at this moment were directed at her. Many were judging. Many pretended to be happy, though no one, by and large, cared. They'd been invited here as a courtesy. Well, and to fill the hall is not good that a famous businessman is left without guests at the wedding. Agatha had time to look around the hall. There were people in black on every corner. They all folded their arms and stood like real guards waiting for an attack. Finally, the girl came to the altar. Martin was already waiting for her there. He stood with a very serious look and from time to time slightly bent his knees from excitement. Agatha stood opposite him. At that moment she felt dizzy, but she did not show it. "Hello, honored guests." "Hello, dear newlyweds." The woman greeted the guests, registering the marriage. "Especially the husband is very young," joked one of the guests, but he was immediately silenced. The others ignored the ridiculous joke. Today is the legal marriage of couples whose love has struck a chord with many. The registrar continued. "Dear Agatha and Martin," she addressed the couple standing next to her. "Today is the most beautiful and unforgettable event in your life. Today you are creating a young family. Creating a family is the beginning of a good union of two loving hearts. From this day you will go through life hand in hand, together experiencing the joys of happy days and sorrows. Observing the solemn rites before the state registration of marriage. Please answer, is your desire to be married? Is it free, mutual, and sincere? Are you ready not only to create a friendly and strong family, but also to preserve it and give a decent upbringing to your future children? I ask you to answer." Groom. The man, not thinking long, took Agatha's hands and looking into her eyes said, "Yes, I ask you to answer bride." The girl turned to Agatha. The bride was embarrassed. All this seemed to her like a strange dream. In her memory flashed some fragments of the past, which confused her very much. She saw neither her chosen one nor her fiancé in the world, but under his intense, heavy gaze. She nevertheless answered in a zombified voice. Yes, the registrar smiled happily and then proceeded to perform her duties by your mutual consent in the presence of your witnesses and guests. Please exchange rings and sign your signatures. Martin gently took Agatha's hand and placed the gold ring on her ring finger. The bride did the same. The registrarша stepped back and pointed them to the papers. Lying on a beautiful marble table, a black pen lay next to them. "Now sign your signatures," joyfully exclaimed the woman. The couple bent over the deed book. But suddenly from behind there was the sound of a door opening, and then someone's swift running. Everyone turned around, including the newlyweds, and they saw a little girl who ran across the hall so fast that the guard could not catch up with her. The child ran to the reception desk and hugged Agatha tightly. She did not understand anything. Meanwhile, the girl hugged her tightly as if she had found her long-lost mother. "Security," Martin shouted. "Do your job." Huge men in black suits ran up to the girl and began to chain her away from the bride. The girl resisted. She was small, about 6 years old at most, but impossibly strong, and a mom. "That's my mom." The girl screamed as hard as she could, struggling against these men in black glasses. One she kicked with her foot in the groin, and he immediately fell to his knees in pain. The other was pulling her legs. So the girl just jerked her foot, and the man fell with her shoe. "Mommy, wake up, it's me." "Your daughter," Mommy broadcast the girl, asking for the girl in the dress. "Please, Mommy Olechka, remember me." She was trying to remember something, but she couldn't do anything. She didn't recognize that girl, no matter how much she wanted to. There was no way she could remember. Then the child pulled her white dress up so the bride leaned over and hugged her tightly around the neck and kissed her cheek. That kiss, like a fairy tale, dispelled all the fog. The woman's memory began to clear. Agatha was now completely sure that this was her daughter. To think it was her Rose, her baby girl. Where had she come from? Who are all these people? She looked at her pseudo-fiancé. He was standing there furious. He was burning with anger. His fingers were clenched into a fist. It was like he was about to punch someone. As soon as all the memories came flooding back, tears flowed from Agatha's eyes. She squatted down and hugged her daughter tightly. "Little Rose is my darling." It was a very tender moment, which unfortunately was interrupted by the bass of Martin's guard removing the baby. The guards had already recovered from the baby girl's marriage and started pulling her away again. This time they managed to snatch the baby out of the mother's hands. The girl yelled, "What is the urge?" tried to break free, but everything was to no avail. Who is she against, these huge thugs? "Let go of my child," screaming at Agatha. "Somebody please call the police." All the guests were just shocked at what was happening. Like the marriage registrar herself in her experience, this was the first marriage that had gone completely wrong. "Rose," Agatha screamed, but no one was doing anything about it. Then she jumped up to her fiancé and started shaking him as hard as she could, clutching at his shoulder. "Will you order them to let them go, Rose Ashol?" The girl hissed angrily. "You shouldn't call me that." "Oh, you shouldn't." With a sly smirk, Martin. He pushed his wife away, and she fell right on top of the guard, who immediately grabbed her. No matter how much she kicked, it was completely pointless. Martin's bodyguard held her firmly in his arms. What kind of lawlessness was this? Did the guests start to get indignant and get up from their seats? "No one is leaving here," Martin shouted across the room. The wedding continues. The guests ignored him. No one was enjoying the show anymore. It smelled fried, but a sudden gunshot made them stop and sit back in their seats. Yes, Martin had to resort to this method of crowd control as well. I repeat, the wedding is in progress. He glared at Shu's terrified registrar and made her put the papers back. Then he beckoned to himself, who forcefully held Agatha down. She was terrified of what was happening. She was sobbing with fear and hatred. Martin signed the document and handed the pen to the bride. She looked at the man with such hatred that he even smirked, thinking that he had won. But he was very wrong. Agatha was not the timid type, not one to give up so easily. She picked up a pen, but instead of using it to make a scrawl on the paper, sharply stuck the thin rod into the stomach of the guard who was holding her. The pen was expensive steel, and so thin, it actually went into that piece of muscle like a sword. The man shrieked in pain and folded himself in half. Agatha ripped off her veil, slashed the man who was holding her poor child across the face with her fist, grabbed Rose by the arm and ran away on her way, managing to tear off the hem of her fairy dress. Running was now comfortable. Whirlwind, she ran out of the building, and 1,000 cameras were immediately pointed at her and her daughter. Reporters, like animals, pounced on the girl with questions. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. "Agatha, what happened? How do you comment on it?" someone asked. The girl was darting from side to side, trying to figure out where the exit from the registry office was. Martin's men were already running out and trying to catch her. She was screaming, asking people for help, but everyone just filmed her on their mobile cameras and iPads, trying to take as many photos and videos of the scandal as possible. She felt like a circus animal that was now performing in the arena. The girl couldn't believe what was happening. She just couldn't get her head around it. Why do people behave like this? And this very head was hurting more and more every minute. But the girl did not give up and wanted to climb over the temporary fence. But then the guard Martin grabbed her by the waist. He easily lifted her as if she weighed as much as a bruise, and carried her and the baby to the car. Agatha squealed, slapping him on the back. Rose was biting and turning and generally helping as best she could. But the man didn't care. He was walking firmly and confidently. The back door of the car had already been opened in front of him. As the guard approached the car, he threw the girl and child off him and pushed her into the passenger compartment. But Agatha, though seemingly weak, actually had good physical fitness. She did not fall on the seat and held on. Then the already angry guard began to literally shove her into the cabin. She resisted with all her might. Suddenly, everyone heard sirens wailing. It was getting closer and closer. And then someone said on the loudspeaker, "No place. Everybody stay in your seats." Aha, saw a cop pushing a security guard away from Martin. Looks like somebody called the cops after all. The guard was outraged by this behavior, but obeyed and stepped back to them. A furious Martin came running up. He was just furious and looked at everyone with such a look, as if he wanted to spear everyone with his eyes. What's going on here? How dare you invade another part of the territory? He was indignant, addressing the policeman. We're here on a call, and I can see that we did not come in vain. The sergeant replied confidently, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Martin kept yelling. Then the policeman was silent for a moment. It was like he realized his mistake. "I'm sorry, but I just needed to already," less confidently said the policeman. "What to ruin my wedding? Please understand, I'm just doing my duty." While the two were trying to work things out, Agatha kicked out between the guard and them and went unnoticed. Thanks to the police car, there was a hole in the partition. It was through it that the girl wanted to get through. She took her daughter and rushed to the fence. She almost reached the gap through which it was possible to get through, but she was stopped by someone's strong male hand, which laid on her shoulder. She turned around and saw a rather young policeman, a regular sergeant in his uniform. "Where are you going, citizen?" he asked her sternly. Though from his lips it was not scary, but rather funny. He was a very nice man who tried to portray himself as a serious and brave fighter. He was very young. He had probably just been hired for the job. Agatha stopped. You looked at him with pitying eyes and whispered, "Please let go. I can't let you do that." The sergeant answered confidently. "But don't you feel sorry for a poor mother with a small child in her arms? Do you really want to give us to the sharks?" "What sharks?" "The girl?" The policeman replied haughtily. "Please." She folded her hands in peace. "He will ruin me and my daughter too." Then the sergeant couldn't stand it any longer. At last, the mask of a serious and self-confident man came off. Now only sympathy could be seen on his face. Agatha did not interfere and took advantage of this moment and put her daughter next to her. She approached the boy and whispered softly in his ear, "I'm going to pretend to use violence against a police officer." The sergeant even pulled away from her. He was embarrassed by the tone with which she said it. He looked at her. Agatha looked like a puppy, praying for help. The policeman stood in silence for a few seconds, then nodded, and while Martin and the other sergeant sorted out their rights, Agatha pretended to resist, threw herself into the policeman's arms, and began to thrash as hard as she could. He played along, trying to hold on. Everyone turned around at their altercation. And noticing this, the girl knocked the poor sergeant in the stomach with a sharp heel. He collapsed to the floor, though it was clear from his face that he was in no pain at all. He was only feigning pain. Agatha was very happy about this, as she didn't want to hurt anyone. At this time, a backup in the form of the surgeon's colleague was already running towards them. He ran up to his partner and helped him up. A few seconds later, Agatha was tied up by two other policemen, and her daughter Rose was taken by the hand and led away. The situation was heating up. Martin finally approached them. "Let my fiancé go," he ordered in a tone that left no room for disobedience. It should be noted that although he was a powerful man, but he was not lucky with his height. He was only 165 centimeters tall, and the commands from his mouth sometimes sounded very funny, especially when he was addressing a tall or clean-cut guy like this policeman. If any of his subordinates let his short stature be mentioned in any way, he would be immediately fired or stripped of his bonus. Martin hated that flaw in himself. Fortunately, for him, money did the job, and everyone, by and large, cared only about the size of his wallet. And now the answer of one of the policemen made him terribly angry. No, it wasn't said in words. It was just that one of the policemen, who kept his hands, richly tied, laughed. Then Martin came up to him and hissed through his teeth with an angry look, threatening him with his finger. "You're laughing, asshole. You're laughing." Then the policeman immediately removed the smile from his face. He caught the murderous stare of his superior. "I'm going to fire the hell out of this place," Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. "I'm going to ask you to calm down." Martin calmly said he know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too. Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides, thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. "Are you going to pay for this?" He said, stopping at every word. "And you?" He pointed at Agatha. "A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me." "Understood." Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? "When?" "Take her away," the irascible businessman asked impatiently. "Tomorrow morning," replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now, but still she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. "I'm going to fire the hell out of this place," Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly, they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. "I'm going to ask you to calm down." Martin calmly said he know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. "She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too." Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides. Thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. "Are you going to pay for this?" He said, stopping at every word. "And you?" He pointed at Agatha. "A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me." "Understood." Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? "When?" "Take her away," the irascible businessman asked impatiently. "Tomorrow morning," replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now, but still she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. It seemed to him that a tear rolled down her cheek, but he didn't think it was necessary to pay much attention to it. The girl had an overabundance of emotion. It was an understandable reaction. Besides, in a couple of hours her stories and face would be all over the news channels. What kind of scandal would play out? But that would come later. And now they were driving under a passport gray sky, which mourned all the sorrows of the day. By the way, you have not introduced yourself, informed the girl with some semblance of a smile. After a few minutes of silence, Tim also with a smile answered the guy he clearly liked where this dialogue leads. The girl only nodded. She did not give her name. So the surgeon had to feel awkward asking the question. I told you my name. Would you like to tell me yours? No, Agatha answered tiredly. She was surprised at her own reactions. After everything she had been through, she could still communicate so calmly and even make jokes. Nothing. The sergeant smiled. I'll find out at the station. You can't hide anything from me there. They drove up to a building as gray as the Sutton weather. It was the police station. Agatha didn't want to get out of the warm car into the pouring rain. But she had to. Tim opened the back door of the car and offered her his hand, forgetting that the girl was handcuffed. She even grinned. Such forgetfulness of the guy, and he still somehow got her out of the car and led her into the building. Of course, he didn't have an umbrella, but he didn't need one. The lot was 5 meters away from them. The building was 3 stories high with lights on in almost every window. But it was the lowest floors that were the most stressful. The semi-basement behind bars and windows that looked out just a little bit. Agatha secretly hoped she was being led to the wrong place. But the line of her inner plea was not heard. Tim took her exactly to the basement. She didn't want to go down there, and the guy seemed to notice that. Oh, it's not a prison. Nothing will happen to you, he reassured her and led her down a special dark staircase. When they arrived at the place, Agatha looked around. There were about 5 cameras in total, and only one of them had some girl in a black miniskirt sitting in it. She clearly looked special and with low social responsibility. Tim asked Agatha to take a seat on the bench, and he himself went to the table where his boss was sitting. He was a very overweight man in his mid-40s. He was holding a real cigar in his hands, huffing like a steam engine, filling out some documents by the light of a dim desk lamp. Good afternoon. Peter brought the girl from that wedding. I suppose you've already been informed. The formidable man looked at him sidelong. He clicked his tongue and rolled his eyes. Yes, my daughter was brought here. She was taken to another ward. He answered indifferently. Which ward? How far from here? Tell me? Agatha exclaimed in tears, approaching the chief's desk. Lady, can you keep your temper? The mustachioed man was indignant. Tim came to the rescue. He took Agatha aside and calmly explained to her, don't worry, your daughter is safe. She is on the 2nd floor where they keep street children. Tomorrow she will be dealt with by custody. No, they'll take her. Martin owns everyone in this town. Please don't give her up, Agatha begged. Tim, come here. I found her papers, said the warden. Tim looked at the girl with a smile and then turned around and walked back to the desk. Agatha's 25-year-old daughter has no daughter. Well, further you will familiarize yourself, ordered mustachioed uncle, and then sharply stood up from the table, although the concept of sharply for him was not suitable. His stomach was so huge that when he rose from the chair, he moved the table a couple of centimeters forward. He took his cigar with him and pronounced, pointing at Tim, You all stay on duty, and I've got to go. After these words, he took another look around his favorite basement and then walked toward the stairs. His footsteps and readings could be heard until he stepped onto the flat surface on the 1st floor. Finally, Tim stayed here in charge. The guy walked up to Agatha and said, Now I have to take you to the cell. I'm sorry, you didn't apologize to me like that, said ironically a female voice on the right. It was the one who was now watching them with interest. Tim looked at her indifferently. Agatha only nodded. She didn't want to cause a scandal. That was the way it was supposed to be, and she was also pissed off by that upstart with the smeared makeup. When Tim led Agatha to the outermost cell, it then dryly spat after them. Agatha was shocked at this behavior, but tried to ignore it all. After all, Tim did. When he locked her in the cell, he went to the desk himself and began to study the documents. So, Agatha, and why is it written that there is no daughter? Marveled the guy. The girl wanted to answer, but then she was interrupted again from the neighboring cell. Donna walked, because and did not want to admit. Then a vile laughter sounded. Here Tim could not stand it any longer, went up to this insolent blonde, looked at her with eyes burning with anger, and hissed through his teeth. One more word, dearie, and your temporary imprisonment here will turn into a permanent one. Believe me, I can make that happen. Oh, dearie, what are you going to do to me? The girl who laughed, the warden's giving you a command. You know who's running this, boss? Me too. That's why you're in the cage. Agatha joined the dialogue. And you shameful beggars didn't ask, but walked the child refused and still dares to arise, replied the blonde with pumped lips. How dare you bore? Agatha could not stand it. Tim sighed heavily. Then he reappeared in the dialogue. Then stop it, both of you. He growled menacingly. You turn to the girl of easy virtue. You will speak when asked clearly. Otherwise, every time I open my mouth, you will be fined for failure to observe public order. You will come out of here with debts that you can only pay off with loans. And you, Agatha, keep your temper, please. I'm asking you a question, answer, and don't lie, or it'll be worse. The blonde pouted her lips and sat down on the poplar tree in her cell. Agatha, on the other hand, simply nodded affirmatively. Tim sat back in his seat and continued his questioning. So where did the child come from? I will answer only to you in private. The girl answered confidently. Tim looked at her tiredly, then said, all right, then let's go to the meeting room. They will. It's like a miracle today, a real fairy tale, the blonde exclaimed. Tim looked at her menacingly, but said nothing. He was tired of arguing. In fact, he really wanted to sleep. The guy was completely unprepared for night duty. He hadn't gotten much sleep during the day because the neighbors with small children had been making noise all day. Either they were just mocking him, or they were really making repairs, while killing the kids who were screaming like crazy. At least that's how it seemed to him. Tim came to work a wreck. And of course, by the end of the day, his mood was completely gone. He and Agatha came into the meeting room. The girl still doubted that there were no more employees, and she would really be alone with Tim. If anyone listened to their conversation, it would surely reach Martin's ears. But what if Tim was working for him too? She thought about it as she walked down the stairs. She'd have to lie again, but it was a lie. Must look very truthful in some of the details of her story. Still have to come clean. They finally reached the room. Tim closed the door. There was a dim orange light burning in the room, only faces were recognizable. They both sat down and the guy started his questioning. So now tell me whose child this is, and if you are the mother, because all the documents say otherwise. I used to believe official records, but now they don't inspire confidence. Convince me otherwise, it's Rose. My daughter answered Agatha. But the thing is, these documents are forgeries. I mean, remember when you asked me in the car about being forced into marriage? Well, Martin didn't recognize my child from a previous marriage. He made me new papers, and they didn't include my Rose. No mention of a first spouse either. He made it look like they never existed. But how very hard is that to do for falsifying documents? I'll remind you again, this is Martin Newman, one of the richest and most powerful men in our country. You don't think he's capable of document fraud? Yeah, for him it's like drawing a circle on a piece of paper. Tim was thinking. He began to check the documents, but found nothing in them that hinted at forgery. But what about it? I think we should call the warden. He knows how to deal with cases like this. Will he help? No, the girl interrupted him. You don't understand, he controls all the brass, all the police, even the media. He can shut everyone up. Yeah, I'm not so sure you don't work for him too. Tim's last words made me literally cringe. It was like he was terribly offended by that statement. So you don't trust me? But Agatha hesitated. Tim got upset, shook his head as if to show how disappointed he was, and then said, well, okay, I won't call my superiors. But then what should I do? In what way? The girl didn't understand him. Martin will come back for you tomorrow. He'll bail you out and take you to the registry office again. Then you can forget about your daughter. She will be placed in an institution. Agatha's head snapped up. Where can she hide? Where to go? She'll sit in a cage like a trained macaque until morning. And then she would be taken away and forced to marry again. And she had absolutely no idea what means Martin would use this time Tim. Begrudgingly, she began. Help me escape from here. What from surprise? The boy exclaimed. No one had ever dared to make such an impertinent offer to him before. Please, how can I let you go? Are you out of your mind? No, I wouldn't risk my career for a dubious person trying to escape from her own wedding. If you are to marry him, then you will marry him. The boy answered firmly, though it was clear from his face that he didn't believe his own words at all. He just tried again to pretend to be an indifferent and rude boss. But deep down, he was still the same good and sympathetic guy. Agatha by Ace Book. Now she had lost all hope. Tim was right. If this was her destiny, then so be it. The policeman took the girl back to her cell. She was gloomier than a cloud. Tim said nothing to her and silently sat down at the desk to work. It was about 10 o'clock in the evening. The restless blonde was already asleep. Agatha lay silently staring at the ceiling for another hour. Different thoughts crossed her mind. She thought about her daughter, who had not even managed to do anything bad to anyone, and she was already forcibly separated from her parents. She thought about Martin, who was just a psycho, and it was obvious that after everything that had happened, he would take revenge. She reflected on how many lies had come off her lips, which he had told Tim about her bitter fate. Almost all of it had been lies. The boy glanced at her from time to time as he filled out the paperwork, but she continued to stare at the ceiling with a blank, broken look. After about 3 hours, Tim couldn't stand it any longer and approached the bars of Agatha's cell. She looked at him again with a painful, despairing look. And then Tim decided to do the terrible, terrible thing for his career of his life. It was a true miracle for the poor girl. He put the key into the lock and opened it. It fell to the floor with a clatter. Tim was startled. It was that the buxom blonde would wake up, but she was sleeping the dead sleep. The boy opened the creaking door and said in a whisper, "Come out." Agatha looked at him as if he were an angel from whom the light of hope and freedom emanated. She did not hesitate to step out into the open. Tim closed the cage and whispered, "Follow me. Follow all my instructions and we won't be noticed." The girl nodded understandingly and quietly followed her savior. They went up the stairs like mice, and when they reached the first floor, they heard someone's footsteps. Tim immediately pressed the girl against the wall and himself went to the floor. There passed his work colleague, who was on duty on the first floor. "About what and you left?" joyfully said his friend. "And he himself is not happy about it," answered Tim, going as far away from the stairs as possible, as if casually. "Listen, where's that little girl we brought back from the wedding today?" pensively mumbled the guy with a smirk. "The daughter of that stunning hottie." "Yeah, well, settle your fantasies already. Where's the girl?" "She's probably asleep on the second one." "What do you want?" "The boss told me to talk to her, so I told Tim." "You picked a strange time to talk to a little girl. Those are the orders." "You know, Peter, sometimes she talks a lot of crap." "Well, since she's asleep, I'll talk to her tomorrow morning." You, by the way, then early, interviewing her guardianship, wanted to take her away by 12. Dima noticed. "Okay, I'm off, since nothing else is going on. Time to hit the sack." "Come on." Tim smiled. They shook hands and went their separate ways. Tim walked towards the stairs as if he were going back to his basement. But in fact, he just wanted to make sure that Agatha hadn't died of a heart attack yet. After those words from his coworker, her daughter was supposed to be taken to the orphanage tomorrow. For a mother, this must be her worst nightmare. "Agatha," whispered Tim, "are you like Rosehurt?" "No, we won't let that happen," the boy answered confidently. Agatha swallowed, coming to her throat. Calm, and nodded uncertainly. Tim took her hand. The hand was as cold as a corpse's. "It's because the basement is very damp and cold," Tim thought with pity. It would be easy to get sick down there. They went further upstairs, and on the way they met no one else. Only an employee sleeping on a chair who was watching the children's ward, where the street children were kept until they were taken away by the guardianship. The man had dozed off, but could wake up at any moment. Tim prayed that door wasn't a cloud. He still had to get the keys in the keyhole. It seemed impossible. Heavy iron doors with a grated window. The guy realized there was no way around the distraction. He took Agatha aside and explained his plan. She supported him, and they began to act. The girl hid behind the information desk. Tim went up to the guard and touched his shoulder. He didn't wake up. Then the guy sighed and yanked him much harder. And only then the man woke up, slammed his eyes shut. He started looking around as if he didn't realize where he was. The man was completely disoriented in space and time. Sam exclaimed, "Tim, why did he fall asleep?" "I see, sorry." Colonel abruptly jumped up the man, presenting his hand to his temple. Only then did he realize he was talking to a regular sergeant. Tim rode, angry. "What are you going to do? And what are you doing at your desk?" "I'll tell the boss." "You're not a rat." "I know that for a fact. I'm not a rat. But if you want to keep sleeping, help me with the basement." "What's going on down there?" is Sam's less interested question. "Yeah, the batteries don't seem to be working. And you know it's still very cold. Especially in this fucking dungeon. I'll be in the hospital with pneumonia soon." "I don't know. I'm actually watching the kids here." "Oh, where are they gonna go?" "You were asleep." "Come on. It'll only take 5 minutes just to figure it out. Give me a hand," I begged Tim. "All right." The man just took it off and followed his comrade downstairs. Tim also made a sign with his hand to Agatha as he left. Agatha made sure they had left and went to the door. She put the keys that Tim had given her in advance into the keyhole. The guy was lucky that his boss trusted him, so he gave him keys to all the departments and finally turned them. She entered a dark room, lit only by the warden's faint light. There were beds everywhere, but there were only 2 children in here, and one of them was her Rose. Agatha recognized her blood at once. The girl was sleeping very soundly. The mother did not wake her daughter up and frighten her. She knew that Rose does not wake up even from the sound of thunder and any noise. So she was sure that the girl would not wake up when she took her in her arms. And she was right. The girl didn't even move when her mother picked her up. She carried her baby out, closed the door, and hid behind the information desk again. A few minutes later, Sam and Tim returned. "I told you it wasn't the wiring." Disgruntled, the little man said. "Who knew?" Tim answered in a feignedly sad voice. "No, you sure did. You're too young." Tim unfired. In the left, the man sat back in his seat and closed his eyes. "That's it. Tim, don't interfere with work," he said, realizing that the guy hadn't left yet. "Good night, Sam." Tim grinned. The man fell asleep quickly, and when Tim was finally sure, he called Agatha to him. She approached him on tiptoe, barely breathing and not making a sound. "Are you sure?" Tim asked confidently, opening the back door leading outside. The service exit for the dark alley employees, where everyone usually went down for a smoke. Agatha only nodded affirmatively. Then the guy opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the barely lit street. She turned around once more to say thank you with her eyes, and then she walked at a brisk pace, with the baby in her arms. But still, after a few seconds, Tim couldn't stand it and caught up with the girl. He was being pulled by some kind of force. He couldn't believe he was doing it himself, but now the guy actually felt some kind of concern for the 2 of them caught up in the jogging strap. He stopped her, touched her fragile shoulder. "Agatha, wait," he said almost in a whisper. The girl shuddered, turned around. There was consternation in her eyes and a maddening weariness. This night was definitely not for sleeping, but it was evident how weary she was. "Where are you going to go?" asked the boy. "Away from this place," Agatha replied indifferently. "You don't even know where to go." "I don't care. I just want to forget this story like a bad dream. I don't care if it goes to hell." Of course, she lied and lied about almost everything. No, she definitely had a plan. "Do you have a place to stay?" Tim asked. "No." "Do you have any money?" "No." After saying that, the guy was completely fenced in. It was as if he tasted victory, because he had already decided everything about himself the moment he let Agatha out of the cell. "Let me help you." Finally, shyly, Tim offered. Agatha looked him over from head to toe, then looked at Rose sleeping in his arms. She really had nowhere to hide right now. Martin would come in the morning and give chase. No matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't escape alone for sure. But you're risking your career. Maybe even your normal life. "If Martin catches us, we'll be eaten to death," the girl explained. "The cameras have already recorded everything. True, I've erased most of the footage from today. But anyway, I'm an accessory to this story now. And if I stay here, I'll be punished, of course. So I have nothing to lose. Let me help you." Agatha was silent. She did not understand why such generosity. But she didn't care about that now. All she cared about was where to hide. While she was pondering in one of the cars parked nearby, a horn sounded. She turned around. Tim was in it. "Did you want to walk?" he asked indignantly, lowering the window. Agatha shook her head. She went to the car, sat in the back, and tried to sag as low as possible in the seat so that she could not be seen. Her daughter squirmed in her arms and mumbled something in her sleep. Tim turned on the headlights and drove out of the parking lot. The police station slowly moved away from them. Then it disappeared behind the clutter of sleeping buildings of the huge night metropolis. After a few minutes, Agatha asked the logical question, "Where are we going? To my apartment? Or was she thinking of hiding from that oppressive dwarf?" In a different and dirty bride's dress, Agatha only grinned. All the rest of the way they drove in silence. After a while, the car stopped at a gray, unremarkable building. If it weren't for the window with a light on the second floor, one would think that the building had been abandoned for a long time. So dirty and neglected was the facade and everything around it. Tim parked the car, and Agatha ventured to ask, without hiding her surprise, "Do you live here?" "Yes," he smiled embarrassedly. "I rent. But trust me, it's not as bad on the inside as it is on the outside." Tim got out of the car and opened the back door. Taking Rose in his arms, Agatha surprisingly easily trusted him with her daughter. Animal instinct told her that this simple guy posed no threat. He seemed remarkably honest and reasonable. Up close, the building looked even lousier. Some of it had peeled off and needed paint. Some of it was decorated with scarlet graffiti. The young men climbed the rain-wet stairs. Apparently the roof leaked somewhere and smelled of mold and dust. Finally, Tim opened the door to the entryway. It was pitch black inside. You could see absolutely nothing. But Tim didn't seem surprised at all. He stepped back a little and pressed the elevator button, an indicator that showed the floor. It was possible to navigate, and Agatha, too, moved toward the glowing displays. They went up to the top floor. It was almost as dark there, but the faint light of the street lamps still penetrated through the narrow, dusty window. While Tim was opening the door, Agatha touched Sunflower on the small windowsill. The pot fell and shattered. The boy looked at her with a stern and judgmental look. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. It was finally possible to enter the apartment. The light blinded Agatha's eyes, and she could not get used to it for a long time. Light after darkness was a new source of pain in her tormented head. She looked around the apartment. As expected, the rooms were rather shabby, and there was only one bedroom. A typical Khrushchev one-bedroom apartment for a single bachelor. In the kitchen, Agatha noticed a cockroach running around the table looking for food. She almost shrieked with horror. After all, she had always been afraid of these insects. "Oh, to something. It's Valurka. He has long lived here with me," calmed her hospitable host. "You give names to cockroaches." Agatha was amazed. "When you live alone, you can think of many," Tim grinned. He sat down on a chair at the kitchen table and gestured to his companion to do the same. But she looked around in fright, as if searching for someone where Rose was. Loudly and desperately she asked, "Hush, hush, don't shout. I put your daughter in my bed while you were looking around. Don't worry, there are no cockroaches on the couch." I looked into his blue eyes to make sure he wasn't lying. And only then could I sit down at the table. "Your name, right? Not Agatha." For so suddenly he had dumbfounded her with the question. Her heart raced, for what he had just said was absolutely true. She looked at him with eyes round with shock. I began, but Tim interrupted her. "Don't lie to me, please." The girl fell silent. She hesitated to tell him the whole truth or not. On the one hand, he was a policeman who could easily turn her into the authorities. On the other hand, he helped her escape, took care of her daughter, and brought her home, risking everything. Those actions did inspire confidence. Agatha pondered for a moment longer, though she had long since made up her mind. And then she answered, "Yes, you're right. Say your real name, Emma." The guy, leaning on the back of the chair, either it was a gesture of fatigue or distrust. "Emma it is," he said thoughtfully. "Who came up with that? His father always had a fetish, but borrowed names." The girl was silent for a while, then inquired, And how did you know that Agatha was not my real name? I just compared the two facts. The tattoo on your left arm speaks for itself, you know. Emma looked at her tattoo. It was in beautiful handwriting, spelled out in her name, though in English. It was a tattoo she had gotten back when she was 16, secretly from her parents. All because she argued with her friends. Yeah, and she kept doing it. You can't forge documents without changing your name. So it all really came together. Yes, you have talent I do not deny. Smiled at the guy. You'll have tea. The girl looked at him with eyes full of surprise. Sorry, I'm not taught manners, but according to me, guests are always offered tea, said Tim. Emma nodded and stared at the wall. The two demons of whether or not to speak were fighting in her again. There's something I haven't said yet, she began, or rather, I lied to you about almost everything. Everything? About what exactly? Tim asked calmly, pouring tea. About how I ended up here. The thing is, my husband isn't dead, and I don't have any aunt who wants to marry me off. Then who are you? I'll tell you, only you sit down. The boy was worried and sat down on a chair opposite the girl. It was 6 months ago. It had begun. October then stood surprisingly warm, but a fine rain we grew almost every day. Wet yellow and purple leaves lay everywhere on the path. Emma and Alex were walking in the park, and their daughter was collecting beautiful leaves for a herbarium. Mommy, look how many I've collected. Rose shouted with joy. Well done, Sonny. Let's finish up. We'll go to meet your grandfather soon, said Emma. Daughter's fault. They played in the park for half an hour before heading to a restaurant nearby. Emma's father had invited them there. He hadn't seen his granddaughter for lunch in a long time and wanted to see her one last time before he left on a business trip to another country. He was a terrific journalist. He was always being invited to different countries for reports or interviews. The family walked up to a beautiful restaurant with panoramic windows that looked out directly onto a small lake. They were met by a friendly receptionist and led to the right table. Michael, Emma's father, was already seated at it. Grandpa willed Rose, throwing herself into the arms of the sturdy seventh man. The man even lifted the little girl in his arms. She laughed merrily with joy. Emma and Alex came up to them as well. Hi, Dad. With a smile, said the girl and kissed her father on the cheek. Alex shook his hand. Everyone sat down at a large table covered with a white, crisp tablecloth. Darling, you look marvelous today. It's a milk dress. It suits you very well, Michael remarked. The daughter smiled in appreciation. Today, she had received 1,000 of admiring looks and compliments on her look. She always looked amazing. The shiny, brown, very thick hair alone. For what it was worth, the shimmering jewelry in her ears, on her fingers, and on her chest harmonized with her outfit. Her husband was proud that he had gotten such a beautiful and intelligent woman. Finally, they placed the order. They began to talk to each other. So why did you invite us? Emma asked her father with a smile. He was a little embarrassed by such a direct question, but still answered, I wanted to see my granddaughter. And also to invite you to something else. Where to? Alex asked with interest. The thing is that I'm leaving soon, and the other day I met an old friend here. You'd be surprised because you've probably heard the name Martin Newman. Polyakov almost choked with admiration. Alex, Emma's husband, was also not averse to playing with adult toys. And in principle, this name was on everyone's tongue, yes, summed up Michael. We've been friends since university. Well, we haven't seen each other for a few years. The other day I was passing by some office and he came out. He recognized each other at once. We exchanged pleasantries, and I told him about my upcoming trip. Everyone listened to him with bated breath. He knows one of the richest and most famous people in the country, and we were definitely already stunned by such a surprise. Well, I invited him to celebrate our meeting to our daksha, Michael continued. And with you, my daughter, we have not talked for a long time. That's why I'm inviting you. The couple looked at each other. They were pleasantly pleased with this proposal. I think we can all get together this weekend. Finally, Emma replied. Her husband nodded his approval. But then they decided to wait for you at the cottage this Saturday, Michael said. He was delighted that the whole family would be together. And his old friend was coming too. Already on Friday, everyone started to get ready for the cottage. "Honey, where did you put my blue shirt?" asked Alex from the other room. Emma answered the laundry, dressing my daughter in pajamas. Alex came into the room with the laundry. "What am I going to wear tomorrow?" He was indignant. "Don't you have any more shirts?" Nervously replied the wife. "In the white one I'll look stupid, as if I want to show off in front of this Martin." "Isn't that what you want?" Emma said with a chuckle. The offended husband pouted his lips and slammed the door loudly. The girl laughed. Her husband's behavior was like that of a little boy who wanted to impress some girl. Emma put Rose to bed and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. She was already uncomfortable. She felt hot and cold. Her head rattled as if she'd been hit with rocks. The woman poured herself a glass of water and wrapped herself in the capital. It was at this time that Alex walked into the kitchen. He found a shirt that was to his liking and wanted to show off to his wife, but she didn't seem to care. And it's okay, he was worried. Just whether his wife knew or not. "I feel really bad." She held her hands to her temple and rubbed her head. Nothing helped. "Are you sick or what?" asked the worried husband. "I don't know. Anyway, you can't cancel anything tomorrow. Father will be offended. I'll drink a fever reducer now. Hope it helps. Let's just call Michael and tell him we can't make it. You're his daughter. Wouldn't he understand? Especially if you suddenly gave him an infection before the trip. That's the kind of thing that'll make him resent you." Emma was silent. She looked down at the floor and thought about something for a long time. "No, we're going. Rose really wanted to go, and so do you. I don't want to upset her. It's just a common cold. I just wore an open coat yesterday," she finally said. "Well, I'm not going to argue with you. It's your decision. If anything, you'll lose it tomorrow at the cottage. Right?" "Yes, honey," Emma smiled. That's when they came to a final decision. The whole night Emma had nightmares. Her temperature was already 38 degrees. She decided not to tell her husband. He might not let her go. She wanted to spend time with her father and her family. The next morning, she felt better. Emma was even able to make her family a delicious breakfast of pancakes with condensed milk. "How are you feeling?" asked Alex as they sat at the table. "Good. I feel better already. But I think I'll have to stay home tomorrow," answered Emma. "We'll arrange that," he promised. He hugged and kissed his beloved. Reluctantly, they packed their things and left the house. The journey amounted to 2 hours. They listened to music, talked, sang, played word games, and generally felt perfectly happy. Finally, they arrived at a wooden 2-story house in the old Russian style. Michael met them on the porch. "Daughter, at last," he marveled. "You are as beautiful as ever." And he was right. This day was no different from any other, because the subject always looked beautiful. Despite what she wore from her mother, she had inherited a perfect sense of style. Today, she was wearing a soft blue dress with a white scarf going on top of the accessory. She looked like a real lady. As Michael walked them into the house, he said, "I marvel at you. You have a husband, a small child, a whole carload of responsibilities, and you still manage to look after yourself. Your daddy raised you right. That's a father. But I gotta tell you, that's not the point. It's just that I got a loving husband and an obedient child. That's the secret." The grown-up daughter smiled slyly, looking at her husband half-turned. She saw a faint smile on his face. It was very flattering for him to hear such words from his own wife. Martin was already waiting for them in the house, sitting at the large dining table and pulling up a beer from his mug. He didn't look like a rich man at all. He was dressed quite plainly in an ordinary black sweater jeans, but he had a great haircut. As soon as he saw the guests, he was showered with compliments, especially on the subject of "Oh, ma'am. You look stunning," he said, kissing her hand. This European etiquette surprised Emma very pleasantly. Her husband, on the other hand, did not like it very much. He immediately took his wife under his arm and led her to the opposite side of the table. "False side of the table. Yes, that's my little girl. You saw it," Michael bragged. "It sure is." Martin stretched out, looking at the angel on the ground. Emma noticed his gaze and smiled. but was a little embarrassed by the attention. Maybe she shouldn't have dressed up like that, but she always looked very stylish. And with her looks, she was always the center of attention. Rose had already run to her room where a lot of toys were waiting for her. On top of that, her grandfather had given her a whole dollhouse. "Mom, we will take this house home," asked the girl. Mom tugged at the sleeve of her dress. "Honey, you come here often enough as it is. Why should we take it with us?" Strictly answered the mother. I want to, I want to, I want to." The girl wouldn't stop. "But we'll give in," and her said already Michael with a smile asked you, "Daughter, your apartment is not small. Put it somewhere." Emma nodded and Rose immediately left her and ran to the second floor to play with her new gift. "Oh, those children," with a smile said Martin. "Do you have children?" Emma asked, stroking her husband's hand. "No," he smiled. "I didn't have a family. It was never going to work out." He sighed a little pretentiously. "At 45, I am still a bachelor." Unfortunately, such a career cannot dock it with a personal life. It's up to you what's best for you. "You're right," Alex answered firmly. He looked at Martin with a hateful look, which was very frightening. "We chose family and we don't regret anything." "And I'm very happy for you," Martin answered. There was a tension in the room. To ease the tension, Michael suggested that they go for a walk around the neighborhood. They went outside. His summer house was located in a rather large village, and the inhabitants of this village 30 years ago planted a beautiful avenue of different species of trees. There was a lot of wedge, so there were empty leaves growing, lying around at every step. "So what do you do, Martin?" asked Emma at last. She held her husband's hand, and the couple walked slowly down the alley. "A little bit of everything. My main business is computer games. I created a company that produces new games. They're very popular. Oh, it would be cool to play." Emma marveled politely at one of them. She glanced over at Alex. He was walking glum and grim as a freight sky. "Yes, Alex." She turned to him. He nodded. "That's a great idea. We'll play tonight in the company of such a beautiful lady." "It will be lovely," Martin replied. With a meaningful smile, Emma replied with the same joyful expression. There was only one thing bothering her. Emma didn't understand his behavior. He was so eager to meet Martin, and now he was dirtier than a cloud. While Martin and Michael went on chatting about their own things, the girl stopped her husband and took him a little aside. "What's going on?" In a whisper, she asked him, giving Alex a stern look. "I have nothing going on, but you and Martin have something interesting going on." He muttered offensively. "How old are you?" Emma couldn't take it anymore and started whispering angrily. "What are you talking about? I'm only being polite. You should learn some manners from him too, shouldn't you? I haven't heard a single compliment from you in a month." "I've heard plenty from other people," cynically replied the husband. "Well, you know, Alex," Emma gritted her teeth and pushed her husband with her shoulder. She went out into the alley and ran to catch up with Michael and Martin. They stopped, as they were obviously waiting for the couple. Emma waved her handkerchief and made a happy expression, though deep down she wanted to cry. Why did she have such an unattentive husband? She'd had so many suitors, but she'd chosen him. Yes, he's a terrific father, but as a husband, he's always been passive, cowardly, and the little things. Every purchase that was meant for Emma, she paid for it herself. Alex couldn't be expected to do anything, or he had a debt to pay, or the wrong time, or some other apocalypse. Emma was getting tired of it, but there were advantages to the marriage. First of all, the wonderful pedigree and genetics. Rose was smart beyond her years, and she was beautiful. Secondly, not everyone could afford a house in the city center, but thanks to Alex, it was possible. Not that Emma married him for the money, but for true love. It didn't smell like it. Some people will say, "How can you marry at 18?" And they'll say you can. But with age, preferences can change. There's nowhere else to dress. Divorce will hurt the baby. Your whole life will go down the drain. So Alex, we tried to maintain an even relationship with each other, although often there were domestic quarrels between them. "Where do you disappear, dear Emma?" Martin asked. "We've missed you already." "I'm sorry, for God's sake." She started to justify herself to my husband. She turned around to look for support, but Alex was gone. Fell into a ditch. Martin finished for her, laughing. I don't know, Emma said thoughtfully, trying to hide the tears that came to her eyes. They walked for another half an hour. During this time, they discussed fishing, career, family. In general, everything that could be discussed. It was getting close to evening, and dinner wasn't ready yet. Everyone had to go back to the house to start the preparations. Emma took over the chicken with the two soldiers. Martin volunteered to help cut up the groceries. Alex was nowhere to be seen. Emma asked her daughter where her father had gone, but she said she hadn't seen him since they had come in here. It wasn't like him, but there was nothing to be done. Salads don't make themselves. You can cook too. Emma marveled. When Martin helped her make the sauce for the chicken, that's a very strange misconception. Did you know that millionaires can't cook? Martin grinned. It's the cooks who make everything for them. I lived a very ordinary life as a child. And in my student years, I made such culinary masterpieces in the dormitory. Why did you ask your father? He admired them the most, Martin said with a laugh. Liar, you bastard. He went into the kitchen. Michael? No, I won't argue. Your pasta was really good, but the pizza. Did you kill her? The man. It wasn't my fault, it was the oven. Justified the famous businessman. All three of them laughed out loud. They didn't like Martin's company. It was an adult, self-confident person who was ready to tease and laugh at himself, not her Alex, to whom you say a word, and then you have to open the window from his heartfelt remarks. But it should be noted that Martin attracted Emma not as a man, but rather as an older relative. Let's say a jolly uncle, almost a brother to her father. He was positive, friendly, and caring. When Emma had another headache, he kindly offered her some imported pill that was supposedly very good. She regarded the gesture as a sign of politeness and courtesy, but Martin seemed to think otherwise. He repeatedly tried to touch her hand, catching her eye, giving her frank compliments. Eventually, Emma began to tense up, but she put it down to the amount of alcohol she had drunk. The wine they consumed while preparing dinner. Quite a lot indeed. Alex came in when they were finishing dinner. Rose had long since gone to bed. Oh, Alex cheerfully greeted him with a tipsy Emma. So where have you been? My darling, we've already moved on to dessert. Alex looked at everyone with a disgruntled look and stopped his number. He looked at him as if he was about to throw a knife at him and kill him. Yes, indeed, you've been on something of a bender. Laughed the businessman, who was terribly drunk. And then Alex saw what he expected and feared. Martin stroked Emma's knee. She took his hand away every time, and he put his palm on her leg again and again. The woman only smiled politely. She wasn't as drunk as this millionaire and realized he was doing something wrong. As soon as Alex saw these signs of attention from Martin, immediately rushed across the table to this underhatch. He hooked his arms around his neck, causing both of them to collapse on the floor. Emma screamed and urged her father to intervene, who was also drunk and struggling to comprehend what was happening. A real fight broke out between Martin and Alex. They began to beat each other right on the floor. But of course, Alex won, because he was completely sober, which is not to say that Martin is much younger than his opponent. The businessman's broken nose was bleeding. Emma screamed louder and louder. Alex lost his shattered fist. At this point, Michael had already woken up and rushed to separate the fighters at the screams. Frightened Rose. As soon as the girl saw this outrage, she too screamed thinly and loudly. Emma ran up to comfort the poor little girl. She took her to the second floor and tried to put her to sleep again. Mom, Uncle Martin, he's alive, Rose asked fearfully. Of course, he just had a bad fall. And Dad and your grandpa are trying to help him now, lied Emma with a smile. She felt a throbbing pain in her head. Her temperature seemed to be rising again. Whether it was from the stress she had been under or some other reason, the process had intensified. After 10 minutes, Rose was finally able to doze off. When her mother was sure of this, she left the room and carefully closed the door. Downstairs, everything was quiet. Emma was afraid to go back downstairs. She was afraid of seeing something else scary. The first floor was as quiet as a graveyard. It was frightening and intriguing at the same time. Emma walked downstairs and into the dining room where everything happened. To her relief, there were no bodies here, except that Martin was missing. Alex was sitting with a piece of ice on his forehead. Michael was sitting across the table, staring at the table. He was as if in a trance, although it was only alcohol intoxication. "Where's Martin?" "Concerned?" Emma asked, approaching her husband. "And you're only interested in him again?" Alex answered angrily. Were his eyes blazing with rage? "No, he just left," interrupted her father. "As soon as I got him up, he took his things, got dressed, and went out. How could you send him away in this rain?" Emma was outraged. "And the fact that he attacked you in front of me didn't bother you at all? Or don't you care that you have a husband?" "Oh, I'm sorry, he's so rich. Surely he could provide himself a brilliant future." Alex was outraged. "What are you talking about? He was drunk." Emma defended Martin. "That's an excuse. Now you're going to make excuses for him. Even though what he did was ridiculous, he treated me with respect. I've never heard so many compliments from you in my life. And he said so many nice things in one night, and for those nice things. Were you ready to sleep with him? My husband couldn't take it anymore. I didn't expect that from you." With these words, Alex stood up, took his coat, which was hanging on the back of his chair, and left the house. Emma rushed after him, but she could only see the glint of headlights running away into the darkness of the night. "Yes," Michael said. "I didn't expect such a turnaround from this evening." "Daddy," cried Emma, like a little baby. "What am I going to do now?" She collapsed to her knees and covered her eyes with her hands. Only her faint whimpers could be heard. Then she smelled the odor of booze, and then a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Go to bed quietly," her father said. "You're all hot. You need to go to bed. Tomorrow we'll deal with everything." The girl looked into his eyes, which always possessed some soothing magic of a kind of support. She immediately found a sober mind, got to her feet, and sprinted to the bedroom. "The morning is wiser in the evening." This phrase fit the current situation very well. In the morning, Emma woke up to a wild pain in her head. The first thing she did was to go into Rose's room, much to her dismay. She didn't find her there, but Emma thought it was all just a glitch. Because of her illness, surely her daughter must be downstairs having a quiet breakfast. She decided to go downstairs to the kitchen too. She was thirsty. She was thirsty. Looking out the window, she noticed that her father's car was missing. Concerned, she went out on the porch, looked around, and saw a note carefully taped to the wooden door. It said in sloppy handwriting, "We're off with Rose to change the tire. We'll be back later tonight. We're going for a walk. Don't miss us." That short note was definitely written by the father. He was the only one who could put it down like that without any embellishments. Quick, clear, and to the point. She took it for granted. She went back upstairs to her bedroom. She was worried about Alex. He hadn't been online since last night. What if something had happened to him? He'd left in a state of complete rage, angry about where he was going. Left his daughter, his wife, his stuff, just up and left. Emma decided to take her mind off things, sighed, and turned on a TV show. An hour passed, 2, 3. She seemed to fall asleep, and when she woke up, it was already late afternoon. Father and daughter were still gone. 3. The subject matter kept escalating. She had already written 1,000 voicemails to her husband. He never made contact. She poured herself some chamomile tea and wanted to go to her room again. But suddenly she heard the key turning in the door. Emma was frightened for some reason and immediately hid. The feast was in the kitchen. The sound was unlike the usual sound of her father opening the door, more like when a lock is picked. Maybe Dad had lost his keys, but why would he break down his own door? He would call Emma. Then the frightened woman decided to cautiously look out the window. She squatted down and peered out from behind the bollard. An ambulance with blue lights was standing outside, but the lock was indeed being tried by some men. Emma was terrified, but she tried to keep her wits about her. She quietly went up to the second floor. She locked herself in her bedroom and started calling her husband. He was out of range as usual. so she had to record voice messages on the answering machine. "Honey, I know you're mad right now, but I have to tell you right now I'm home alone. Everyone's gone somewhere. There's people banging on my door." She hesitated as she heard a loud conversation on the first floor. She realized that these people were able to break into the house, so her mother decided to prop her door open with at least a bollard. That would hold them off for a while she did so. At the same time, she continued to talk into the phone. "They're already here. They broke into the house. I think it's Martin. God, I'm so scared. Were you right, Alex? Where the hell are you?" She shrieked into the phone when she heard the terrible stomping. They were quite close. Emma pressed send on the message and tucked the phone into the pocket of her robe. She was already prepared for the attack. She moved as far away from the door as possible to the window and armed herself with a table lamp. A moment later, 2 men in black balaclavas burst into the room. They looked like the very real robbers, only they weren't after jewelry, they were after a living person. Behind her, one approached, and Emma tried to hit him with her weapon. But this guy seemed to be a good shot and almost immediately knocked the lamp out of her hands. She found herself unarmed. Within moments, something was injected into her hands. A cold liquid spread over venom. After a couple seconds, Emma's eyes ran out and she collapsed to the floor unconscious. One guy threw her onto his shoulder and went to the exit. There, an ambulance was already waiting for them there, with Martin as the head doctor. This car was just a disguise, and for the neighbors, so that they would not ask unnecessary questions, and further told Emma Tim, taking another sip of black tea. "Everything was like a fog. They kept me on some kind of drugs for 6 months. I couldn't walk, talk, or even think for myself. I remember it all like a blackout. It was a living hell. You wouldn't wish it on an enemy. But on the day of the wedding, apparently they lowered my dosage. So when I saw Rose, the girl hesitated. It was as if some gears were turning in her head. She looked carefully at the table, at her hands, and only then raised her eyes to Tim. Wait, she stretched out. How did my Rose show up at the registry office?" Here Tim became nervous. On his forehead, protruded under his breath, became cleared. It was all very visible. Tim called out to him Emma in horror. She tensed up too. God, this guy must be one of their gang too. She felt sick to her stomach and her eyes darkened. "I'm in on the story too." Finally, he confessed. "But don't be frightened, please. I'll explain it all to you now. It was a month ago. I was called on duty to a bar. A police car with blinkers stopped at the door of the bar. Tim got out, tired from his night shift. He saw a drunk who 2 guards were trying to kick out, but they were having no luck. The 3rd guard was already lying on the floor with a bloody nose. That's why the police were called. Tim drew his service weapon leisurely. He approached the drunkard, who was yelling some threatening speeches, and sharply pulled him by the sleeve. He almost fell down, having lost his balance for a couple of seconds. "Come with me," strictly said Tim Yanchik, and slowly turned around with a haughty grin. Said, "And who are you anyway?" Tim didn't bother with him. Shot him in the air. Sobered up and recognized the approaching man as a police officer. Then he turned the man around and was about to handcuff him. Suddenly the drunk kicked him hard in the crotch. Tim was writhing in pain. And at the same time, the scoundrel snatched a gun from him and began to threaten everyone around him. The guards stopped being brave and put their hands behind their heads. And who knows what would have happened if not for one guy who happened to be passing by. He quickly oriented himself, took a heavy rock from the flower in front of the bar, and smashed it on the madman's head. But he did it so carefully that the alcoholic only collapsed to the floor. There was no unconsciousness, no blood, no death. It was just that the young drunk was now lying on the pavement. As soon as Tim got up, he twisted the man around, and he and the guy shoved him into the car after they had done all the paperwork. Tim motioned for the guy to step outside for a smoke. "Thanks for your help. I really did." "I could have gotten fired for being unprofessional," Tim said. "He's lighting a cigarette. What's your name for?" "What?" the guy asked. "Tim, just Tim to you. I'm Alex. What are you doing here?" That's how they met. Alex told everything about his life to his stolen wife, and that damned thing. When I got that message, Alex told him then, My heart just sank. I was ready to kill myself. You know, I'm an idiot. I left my wife in that position, and now she's been stolen right from her father's house, he lamented. Of course, at that moment I was terribly frightened and started urgently calling my father-in-law. Michael Nikolaevich, your daughter Emma? God, she was kidnapped, shouted Alex into the phone. He was rushing around in circles from place to place, not knowing what to do. More than 12 hours had passed since he'd left home. He was now 2 hours away from this house. There was silence on the phone. Finally, Michael was able to pull himself together and answer. Where did the information come from? She sent me a voicemail. She suspects Martin. Even through the phone you could hear it. Michael's heavy breathing. He was thinking. On the information he had just received. Where are you now? Finally, the man outside his house asked. I left here yesterday and go to the airport right away. Martin will definitely go there. He lives in Washington, after all. Rose and I will be there in about an hour. Keep us posted. Yes, sir. Alex didn't know why he called his father-in-law sir in a moment of danger, but that was Michael's command. He had to become an officer, not a journalist. The boy followed every instruction. He rushed at full speed to the airport and prayed that the Martin had not yet left. He didn't make it. When Alex asked the flight attendant where the plane from flying to Washington, she answered him that the last flight for today was completed. But Alex was not interested in that. Through the panoramic windows of the airport he saw the plane, near which was parked a rather familiar expensive car Martin. The guy almost bruised his legs trying to get out. And he succeeded. Poor tried to stop him, called security, but Alex was already running at full speed to his beloved. He jumped out on the takeoff field and ran as fast as he could, like a good sprinter. The plane was about 50 meters away. He personally saw his poor wife being carried on a stretcher into the private plane. Behind her, Martin's Archer came in and times her. He even seemed to smile evasively at Alex before disappearing from sight. But Alex kept on fighting. He ran and ran as fast as he could. But the nasty time was failing him. It was only a couple of meters away from the plane, which had already removed the ramp and was starting to turn its propellers. As it moved from the place and rolled down the runway, and the police were rushing towards Alex. And instead of helping the man who had his wife stolen, they began to beat him with batons. Alex fell on the asphalt. He was panting. Michael's voice was heard screaming. Stop, but they continued to beat him until he lost consciousness. I came out of the medical coma they put me in to survive only 2 months later. Alex continued, telling the story. It took a few more to recover, as soon as I could walk again. Immediately, I sprang into action and am still looking for ways to save my wife. I'm sure you Timka knows the bloody fiend. I don't know him personally, but the whole town's talking about him. He's getting married soon. And then Tim stopped talking. He put all the puzzles together in his head. So it's a wedding. The policeman was amazed. Yes, with my wife. Alex said bitterly, and I'm trying to find a way to prevent it. There was a long silence. And after a few minutes, Tim said, so listen to me carefully. I have a plan. And what's next? Emma asked. She liked the denouement of the story more and more. Now her passive husband played not the least role here. And then it's business as usual. Alex brings her daughter, tells her what to do and how to do it. She's a fighting girl. I'll tell you, so small and so fearless, just fire, not a little girl. Admired Tim Rose. So she bursts into your wedding. And then you know the rest, Tim replied, and exhaled with relief. It was like a weight off his shoulders. But how could it be? I mean, you convincingly didn't believe me, did you? Said Emma. But that was the whole point. You weren't supposed to know all the cards. Not while we were in danger. But I don't believe you risked your life and career for a mere passerby who saved my life. Notice, Tim replied with a smile. It still doesn't add up for me. Where is your husband then? You'll find out tomorrow. After all, tomorrow will be an unforgettable day for you. Too intriguing, said Emma. I'm so tired of all this. Tim only shrugged his shoulders. In response, they drank tea in silence and went to bed. Tim gave the girl his old shirt and shorts. The torn white dresses were thrown in the trash. Those he had to sleep on the sofa in the kitchen. But most importantly, Emma was now able to feel safe and comfortable. It had been a long time since she had felt neither where she slept nor how she did it. She was held as if in a fog. Right now, her head was splitting open, and every muscle felt like it was being twisted, pulling at her with a nasty pain. But this is a strong woman. I ordered myself not to think about the pain. The most important thing was to get out of this foreign, hostile city, to get home, to save herself and her daughter. It no longer seemed strange to her that she was sleeping in a strange man's bed, in a strange shirt, missing men's cologne. The main thing now was that she felt alive, an almost sober mind, her own thoughts. How wonderful that was. She would probably have to undergo special treatment to get rid of the remnants of this crap she'd been fed. But she'll get through it all. For herself, for her family, for her daughter. The next day, Emma woke up with terrible anxiety and a dry throat. She drank some water, but it wasn't enough. Her head ached terribly. She looked in the mirror. A layer of anal cream overnight had wiped away everything. And now the pronounced bruises under her eyes could be seen. No, they weren't bruises from her dosage, but from the drugged doorman. She felt absolutely shattered. Emma saw Tim, who had just gotten up from the couch. He too had a glass of water and then walked over to her. Yeah, the guy stretched out. "You look like hell, sis. How are you feeling?" "My head is pounding," admitted his guest. "Oh, that's a manifestation of drug addiction for sure. But don't worry. You don't need an extra dose for that. There are more humane methods." "Like what?" Emma asked with interest. "A silly joke." Repented immediately, Tim. "I don't know exactly what to do in such cases. But I have a gift from my grandmother. She collects all kinds of herbs from my grandmother. She gives it to me whenever we see each other." When he said that, his eyes shone with real love and warmth. I took out a jar of herbs from the cupboard and brewed it all over the kitchen. Immediately, the amazing aroma spread, fresh, leathery meadowgrass and berries of some sort. The two of them finished the whole mesmerized. The kettle, designed for 6 cups if diluted with boiling water. And it did help. And Rose woke up and immediately ran into the kitchen. Mommy, are you here? We made it." "Really, now we're going home." My daughter Emma hugged her brave and little. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay, Mom," replied this amazing child, and affectionately rubbed her cheek and Mommy's hand. "Oh, here comes our savior," winked Tim at her. "Grab the yogurt in the fridge, and let's go." "Run where?" Emma suddenly asked. "What do you mean?" "Do you have a meeting today?" Tim smiled enigmatically. "Tim, what kind of meeting?" "Get cleaned up, and you'll find out." Emma obeyed the boy and went to her room to get dressed. Only then did she realize that her clothes weren't even here. She, embarrassed, walked into the kitchen again. "Woo, I thought you weren't coming." "Okay, not a funny joke," Tim said. "I'm not very good at jokes, if you've noticed. Anyway, I got myself a dress for the occasion." A little birdie whispered that you're very fond of blue. Emma nodded affirmatively and continued to listen attentively. "Put on a tracksuit and a jacket. You'll find them in my closet. There's nothing else feminine in there. And a hat low over your eyes for 2. And let's go to the meeting." We've been waiting a long time, and she suspected who she was going to meet. Inwardly, she prepared for a very serious conversation. She and Alex had left on such a terrible note, and it had been more than 6 months. Emma put on everything they had prepared for her and walked back into the kitchen. Rose had already eaten her yogurt and was ready for a new adventure. But how do you see? Fidgeting in front of her, having changed into this too. Seeing him, Emma just awed in her understated pants. The fat one with the graffiti pattern carelessly shifted, the cap worn backwards. Now he looked more like a street hooligan than a law enforcement officer. With a suit like that, I'm not likely to be immediately recognized as a fugitive cop. He laughed, seeing Emma's bewildered look. "Where are we going?" she asked, recovering from the culture shock. "There's a great cafe not far from here," Tim answered cheerfully. "That's where we're meeting." When they left the apartment, Tim checked several times to make sure everything was turned off. And then he brought a huge backpack full of things. As they walked down the stairs, Mom decided to ask why you need so much stuff in the cafe. The boy was surprised. This, alas, is not a cafe. I just forgot to warn you. We're not coming back here again. Now not only Martin, but the entire city police force is looking for us. The first thing they'll do is visit my apartment, so I'm not coming back here. Well, where are you going to go? The girl Emma wouldn't stop. Stop asking questions. Please. All in good time. You'll find out soon enough. They entered an American-style diner. Emma felt like the heroine of a soap opera, although her life for the last 6 months had been somewhat of a horror movie. A hostage victim. Kept on drugs for 6 months. She felt sick when she remembered it. No sooner had they approached the table than Rose burst forward screaming, "Daddy, Daddy! I'm back!" Everyone in the cafe turned to them. Alex only smiled at everyone and sat the restless daughter on his lap. Now it was Emma's turn. When their eyes met across her body, goosebumps ran down her body. She held her breath, and then Alex enclosed her in a tight embrace. They didn't say a word to each other, but it was clear enough. So I don't want to interrupt your happy reunion, but let us rejoice afterward for a while. Tim interrupted them embarrassedly. You're attracting too much attention, and we're running out of time. The couple sat down at the table, and Tim sat down with them. Alex, he said quietly now and then. Emma, as if that name held the deepest meaning. How are you, my poor girl? I missed you so much. Barely holding back tears, replied Alex. I'm so sorry we didn't that night. The guy cut him off. Don't blame yourself for anything. I was the one who was wrong. If only I hadn't left that lousy night. Oh, well, we'll talk about it later. I'll tell you one thing. These terrible months have made me realize one thing. No matter how much we fight, no matter how many misunderstandings, it happens to everybody. What matters is that we have each other. I'll never leave you again. You should know how much effort I spent trying to get here, and I got here to save you. Whatever it cost me. Terrific speech. Ironic, said Tim. The Oscar bro, we'll rehearse another time. Right now, our problem is we're running out of time. And you still haven't told her about our plan. The thing is, began Alex, addressing his wife, that they won't let us out of town for nothing. We are wanted. To be exact, you, Rose, and Tim. That's why Tim and I have devised a whole plan. Alex leaned even closer so that the plan could not be heard by prying ears. However, here in this noisy second-rate diner on the outskirts, they had no fear of stalkers. There's a van in the backyard. It's got ice cream on it. To get out of here without being seen, I took out a sole proprietorship. Basically, pretend I'm a real entrepreneur, driving freight, all that stuff. Unload the whole van. There's a refrigerated truck full of ice cream, and it's got a secret section. Your father and I set it up. They're opening it up. Check, please. It's filled with boxes of ice cream. It's like a refrigerator on wheels. But you're comfortable and warm inside. You'll see, once we're all loaded, I get in the driver's seat and calmly drive us to where we'll start our new life. The plan was as foolproof as a Swiss watch. All the characters in this story played their roles brilliantly. Rose, Emma, and Tim took refuge in the trailer, piled with boxes of the most authentic ice cream. Alex got behind the wheel. Inside the passenger compartment, everything was furnished like in the smallest hotel room. There were bunks, a mini kitchen, and a toilet. You could live here for years if you needed 5-star comfort. Rose was absolutely delighted. It's just a shame you can't see out the windows. She complained a little, but then she got better. But we'll go as real spies for the ladies. Emma smiled at her daughter. She was glad this whole nightmare was finally coming to an end. How did you ask her Tim after hours on the road? I'm good. I mean, I still want to dose, but I realize it's an addiction. I'll get there as soon as I can. I'll see a doctor. Then they slept, then they stopped somewhere and slept. Alex to take a break. It seems that after almost a full day's journey, they were already approaching familiar homelands. We are already in Utah. Alex joyfully informed them at the next stop. Suddenly, at some point in the journey, the truck accelerated sharply. It was very noticeable. The passengers in the trailer got worried. Tim tapped Alex on the wall. He opened a secret window between the cab and the body. Alex, where are you going so fast? We're getting there. Unfortunately, we are not alone. We have time for everything. Nervously answered Alex, pressing the gas even more. We are being chased. Hold on, don't panic. That's for sure. There were Martin's men. They were following them in a huge armored jeep, and after a while, they started shooting at the tires. That's when it got really scary. Emma, take Rose and hide behind the closet. Make a barricade of pillows, Tim ordered. While they were doing that, Tim pulled his service gun out of his pocket, causing Emma to have a real nervous breakdown. What is that? Screamed she. Gun. Unless you want to die, you're going to have to choose either their life or yours. Tim replied firmly. A real firefight broke out. Alex and Tim were shooting back from the cabin. Emma plugged Rose's ears with her hands and shook in the inner trailer. She smiled at her daughter and told her everything was fine. Alex continued to increase speed, trying to get away from the pursuers, and it seemed that everything was already over. On the narrow mountain serpentine, it became quite bad. The long truck was being tossed back and forth at breakneck speed. Emma prayed silently that they wouldn't drive off the cliff, and then she heard a familiar, nasty voice from the loudspeaker stop the car. If you don't want to get hurt, it was Martin. Was he there too? And we were very surprised to hear that. It's a pretty dangerous race. Wouldn't he be sorry to risk his life? He'd send his thugs away from them. But the question was unanswered, and the truck accidentally crashed into a roadblock. They rammed the back of the truck and boxes of ice cream spilled onto the road. But that's nothing. At high speed, the truck hit a lamppost, which collapsed right onto the road. It didn't just block the path of Martin's car. It knocked her serpentine. The car dangled for a full minute, spinning and wheeling helplessly over the precipice. And then it went down. There was a massive explosion. Our fugitives watched in complete prostration. Shocked by this outcome, they all ran out of the van to see what had happened to the pursuer's car. And it seems that now these scary people no longer posed any threat to them. Oh my God, Alex. I squealed, either from joy or shock. Emma, what have you done? What have we all done? What's going to happen now? The boy was tensely silent. He realized for himself what had just happened. It could certainly be considered an unintentional murder, unless one knew the full background of the events. And if you did, then it was a planned murder. That's a whole different story. Let's get downstairs, screamed Emma in a panic. Maybe they can still help her as best they can, trying to calm her down. Emma, they can't be helped. They're all dead. Now that creep won't hurt you anymore. No moaning. Anna, no, it's not that wrong. We didn't mean to. We couldn't kill them. If we hadn't killed them, they would have killed us. Didn't blink an eye. Tim continued to stand his ground. A few minutes later, they called the rescue services. Those, of course, arrested the driver of the perpetrator of the whole situation and safely took him to the police station. Tim. And almost unhinged from terror, the young mother and her daughter were driven to Emma and Alex's home in the center. Alex's trial was not scheduled until 2.5 weeks later. During this time, Tim and Emma visited him every day. In one of those visits, Emma suddenly realized that she really loved her husband. She doesn't need a divorce to settle domestic disputes. And she's not a coward at all to just run away from her problems now. What's the best shirt for me to wear? She asked Tim, who was finishing the coffee in her kitchen. They're all the same. The guy shrugged. What's the point? Emma couldn't take it anymore. This one's milky, and this one's pure white. Tim took another look at the shirts. To him, they were exactly the same. But he tried to lie. Well, take the right one. It's white. She, on the contrary, is milky. Nervously uttered the girl. She had already resigned herself to the fact that Tim thought absolutely nothing in style and colors. Case number 320 is being heard. Monotonously pronounced the judge. The defendant is accused of premeditated murder of several persons. All the victims died as a result of a traffic accident. The trial lasted 2.5 hours. During all those long and crawling hours and minutes, Emma never once left the courtroom. She was terribly worried about the fate of her husband because her own life depended on it. Alex was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 7 years in a penal colony of general regime. And it seemed that she was about to faint from these cruel phrases. But I think she expected that. She obediently listened to the verdict and left the courtroom with the others on wooden legs. But once at home, she was pissed off badly. How on earth could a man be given 7 years in prison on the condition that they chased him and threatened his safety? Well, first of all, the court doesn't know anything about it, Tim explained to her. And there's no need for this psycho to know. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of associates left. I don't know. They know less, as they say, they sleep better. And Alex, willingly or unwillingly, killed them. So everything is fair here. The girl turned to him unhappily and looked straight into his eyes. You are now, by the way, sitting on his favorite chair. Honey, please be reasonable. Dad stood up for Tim. I understand the stress you've been under. It's terrible. We thought we'd lost you forever. But please understand, Alex was put away for a reason. People died because of him. No matter how bad they were still people. Emma sat next to her father on the couch and pressed her body against his. Then she whimpered into his sweater like a little girl. She wanted so badly to feel the warmth of a loved one beside her. But the most beloved person today was not here. And that's terrible. Handing it in. Finally, the deadline approached and Emma was able to visit her husband. The prison was quite large. When Alex was brought out, she was pleasantly surprised. He looked quite neat in his striped robe. Alex sat down across from her and picked up the phone. Emma couldn't contain her feelings and cried. How are you doing, honey? She asked. It's pretty normal for a prison. I'm not being starved or beaten, so I'm not suffering. How are you doing? We're fine. Rose goes to daycare. I miss bringing Rose here too. I don't want her to grow up without a father. Besides, they say you can get parole if you behave yourself. I'll do my best. That's when they said goodbye. They only had a few minutes to talk. It was very upsetting for Emma, but she was told they gave her more time at lunchtime. The next day, her father called her with a very strange proposal. Honey, I want to make a movie about you, he said about me. Emma was surprised. About all the horror you've been through. Come to the studio today and we'll discuss everything there. And indeed, Michael decided to release not exactly a movie, but a TV show where Emma would tell the whole country all the details of the nightmare, and then their consequences. This program instantly gained millions of views and became very popular. The case of Emma and Alex received wide publicity, and in a few months under public pressure, the court decision was changed. And Alex was finally able to be home with his family and even received compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Daddy, Daddy, Rose shouted when she was finally able to see her birth father alive and well. Now they were recognized on the streets. Books were written about their plight, and even movies were made. Emma's story has touched the hearts of many, many people. Some found in it motivation for themselves. Others offered support for Emma herself, who had been through such an ordeal. Here's what respondents to a small survey once said in the studio on a talk show. Emma's story inspired me to be braver, to not be afraid of my own prejudices. After all, if she could get out of the hands of such a villain, out of such hopelessness, then I can solve my problems. They're nothing compared to her family's. And that was the end of it. Tim forever became a full-fledged member of the family Oi, named Brother Alex and favorite Uncle Rose. He retired from the authorities and together with Alex. On the warm southern shores, Alex's travel business. We began to quarrel much less often, and we cemented our union with the birth of another child, and Emma's father became well known and achieved great success in his profession.